Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
With a lifetime of passion for public television, we are pleased to help underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES TV.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, we hear about criminals fleeing the police. Another issue is the police fleeing the force. We will hear some former NOPD's officers' explanations about why. Elsewhere this week, the Orleans Parish District Attorney is asking for citizens' help in making prosecutions, and investigations continue about a deputy constable alleged to have ignored a rape. Plus, New Orleans mayor appointed a so-called nighttime mayor to oversee the entertainment district. One issue may be accusations of labor exploitations at some of the bars. That and the possibility of a railroad connecting New Orleans and Baton Rouge are on the agenda for tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. LeBron Joseph, news anchor, WGNO-TV, Channel 26. Tony McAuley, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And Dave Cohen, news director, WWL Radio. And we're going to stick with David first because we keep hearing about officers leaving the New Orleans Police Department. And you guys looked into that, talking to some of these officers who've left, trying to find out why.
Yeah, and it really was remarkable to me that of the 10 current and former officers that Tan Trung interviewed for WWL Radio and WWL.com, we heard the same complaints and concerns from officers across the board, regardless of their race, their gender, their age, how many years they've been on the force, or where they were assigned in the city. It was a common chorus of things that really had them so concerned that they didn't feel like they could work for the NOPD anymore. They were fearing not only that the bad guys outnumbered them, outgunned them, and with the out-of-control crime were overwhelming them, but they feared for what their supervisors would say and do and for what the Public Integrity Bureau would say and do. One after the other, they said it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when they would be accused of something, rightly or wrongly, and could either face discipline, firing, or even going to jail. And they said it's out of control in New Orleans, and they felt like they either had to leave the business completely or go to another agency where they didn't face those issues. At the same time, we have a doubling effect now of losing cops because all of them said as the force continues to shrink, now about 900 officers compared to the 1,500 that it's been generally agreed would be ideal for New Orleans, that they don't have the backup they need if things go wrong. So they fear that if they get in a bad situation, it will take too long for another officer to come and help them, or backup may never arrive, because they said there were nights, for example, in the New Orleans East area when there were only 3 police officers on the street.
That's a big
at
area.
any given time. Yeah, and they said, no, you needed 6 or 7 to cover that area effectively. So they were concerned about the staffing levels, meaning that they could not get the help they needed if they needed it. They're also overburdened. They had so many calls, and they'd come in, and then the first thing they do is find out that there were dozens of calls holding from the previous shift. So that's why the response times have grown to 2.5 hours for non-emergency calls and for calls on average across the city of New Orleans. And so now they're overworked, and they don't feel safe. And on top of that, they said they don't feel under the consent decree and under the rules and regulations that they could do what they had to do to stop the bad guys. For example, the no chase policy, that in every single instant, if someone is fleeing from them, they would have to seek and get approval from the rank just to pursue them and try and catch them. They said it left a situation where the bad guys literally were laughing at them, where the criminals knew that all they had to do was get in a car and flee at a high rate of speed, and that the NOPD wouldn't chase them. They told us that they were afraid to even unholster their weapons, even when they knew they had to or thought they might have to, because it would be so scrutinized that they could end up getting in big trouble, plus fears of cronyism, fears of favoritism within the ranks, that officer after officer after officer with the NOPD told us that they just couldn't do it anymore.
And this scrutiny, is this because of the consent decree?
It's a combination of factors, but it's largely rooted in the consent decree, with the U.S. Justice Department and the federal judge overseeing NOPD to ensure constitutional policing. None of them said they had any problem with constitutional policing. They said, though, it's gone to a level so far beyond that that they cannot safely operate and do their jobs in the NOPD. So many of them are going to forces where they won't face as strict a scrutiny and where they will feel like they can do what they have to protect themselves.
So has there been any movement on, the mayor had said that she was going to try to get from under this consent decree. Has anything moved toward that?
We have not heard any update from the federal judge overseeing the consent decree in terms of the mayor's request to move on from that. There are still issues with the current monitors that are evaluating the progress of the NOPD that have said that the New Orleans Police Department is not ready in several areas to be removed from the oversight of the judge and the Justice Department. So I don't think there's any realistic expectation that that'll go away anytime soon. And even if it does, the whole point of the consent decree is that what it grew into and what it brought will remain. It's not the idea that as soon as we say, oh, okay, the consent decree is over, that the NOPD can then go back to previous practices that were ruled or found to be inappropriate or not what the city needs at this point.
So the feds will continue to review, even once they are no longer, the consent decree is no longer in place. There will still be some monitoring of it to some degree, is what you're saying.
Oh, of course there will. And I think if you see a sudden reversal or change, then there's going to be an application to the Justice Department to reinstall a consent decree. So I don't think that that's necessarily going to solve anything. And we don't know really at this point what, if anything, is going to solve this. The mayor, as we know, was browbeat into not taking a trip to Singapore and said she was staying in New Orleans for the purpose of showing and telling police officers that she loved them and cared for them, and started to attend roll calls and meetings in every district and every bureau throughout the New Orleans Police Department. And she released several things that she wanted to do to try and improve police morale in hopes of getting the police officers who are still on the force happy with their jobs, so they'll encourage their friends and family to join the NOPD as well, and hope that there's a ripple effect in recruiting through that. But a lot of the feedback we heard from these officers was that the steps the mayor and the police chief announced were not what they thought had to happen in order to get them and their colleagues to stay. But time will tell, and we'll see if what she is doing is going to be effective in reversing this really tidal wave of cops leaving the force.
Really tight answer to this. Is recruiting being beefed up?
Yes. There's more money going into recruiting, and the Police Foundation is going to try even harder to recruit cops, but it's a national problem, and it's going to be hard.
I just,
Right.
if I could jump in there,
Sure, Tony.
because they do say it's a national problem, but the unfilled budgeted positions now is well over 20%, at a time when the crime rates in a lot of other cities have started to come back, and we're still seeing crime rates ballooning here. So there's something extra going on here, rather than just that general difficulty in attracting folks.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Let's go and move on over right now to LeBron, and because we have a nighttime mayor. What does that mean?
Yeah, yoo-hoo. We have an Office of Nighttime Economy is the official name of it, Marcy, and or nightmare, as you put it. And essentially what it means is it's an office to sort of facilitate the nighttime economy here, and that includes bars, that includes restaurants, it includes our music folks, hospitality workers as well. Jan Ramsey of Offbeat Magazine had called for this almost 10 years ago. Many cities have started to do this in order to sort of manage that. And the argument from the people that work in this business or in those industries has always been that, we work a complete different day shift than everyone else. And folks creating policy for what happens in the nighttime, if you will, are people that don't understand the difficulties, the challenges, and essentially what it is we do. And those things can be many, from facilitating relationships with neighborhoods, from facilitating, and we've never figured this one out to sort of be all on the same page with things like the noise ordinance. That still hasn't been solved yet, hoping that this office will do something to help that. Now, that being said, there is a quote-unquote night mayor, as you mentioned, Howie Kaplan, over the owner of Holland Wolf. He's also the manager of the Rebirth Brass Band. And while Howie's credentials for folks of that economy and people that are in the music business, if you will, his credentials are impeccable, and his service to the city is, a lot of folks touted that. However, a little bit of controversy that sort of came along with this, because Howie will now be over an office to which two of the businesses that he owns are under the purview, if you will, of that office. And, folks were quick to remind us and others that, we sort of had that situation with who the mayor appointed to head the STR office, and that this gentleman had worked for a number of the larger
short-term rentals.
Yes, exactly, correct. Some of the short-term rental, and that gentleman is no longer in that position, by the way. There was a lot of complaints about some of his actions and directives. However, back to the nighttime mayor. The mayor at the press conference defended her appointment of Kaplan. Kaplan also is, he mentioned that they were waiting on an opinion from the state ethics board as to whether or not, he would be okay with having this position. It's an office with an approved budget of about $500,000. I think his salary is a little over $100,000. But as he pointed out, he won't be in charge of any money or money distribution to clubs or anything like that. I mentioned Jan Ramsey a few minutes ago, and one of the things that she spoke to, and she sort of bullet pointed, that there are simple things that we should be able to facilitate, things like loading zones for musicians. And that sounds like, well, what do you mean by that? Well, if you're a guy who plays drums or someone who plays keyboard, you have to work at Snug Harbor or something of that nature, and the difficulty of parking in the Maroney or whatever, if there was a zone that you could load and unload, and then go ahead and park your car someplace else. Those things are important to that economy and helping both the club and the music makers, if you will. There were many, many other things that she bullet pointed, but also that we have heard from some folks in the club business, in the bar business, in the music business, help with how he said that the office wasn't going to be an enforcement office, right? However, a number of the things that we have heard from some of the clubs and some of the bars is asking that the city does enforce some of the laws that are already on the books, and and requiring music clubs to close their doors, if you will, that this cheapens the music when in fact that doesn't happen, and so there are a number of different things that the office hopes to address.
Okay, and you mentioned Jan Ramsey with Offbeat. She's been listening to musicians and club owners for over 3 decades now. So she's gotten an earful. She kind of knows, and she's not shy about sharing what she's learned, that's for sure.
Yeah.
We really do. Okay, thanks a lot, LeBron. All righty, Tony, let's go on over to you. And talking about some issues within the hospitality industry, the restaurant workers, et cetera, contract workers, and they're complaining, having some complaints about being treated not fairly.
Yeah, well, it's very much part of the nighttime economy. Maybe underappreciated are the shot girls who, and there's no boys as far as we can tell, who go around in the bars and clubs with shots on their hips like guns in their holsters, and they're selling liquor shots to folks. I think most people will have experienced that once or twice in their lifetime. So anyway, a group of shot girls have launched a lawsuit against Fat Cats Music Club on Bourbon Street. And it's similar to a suit that was launched by some exotic dancers about a year ago, which is still outstanding, against Stilettos and some other clubs. And what they say is it's like the Uber and Lyft lawsuits, which have gained national attention, and other similar ones, where it's called misclassification, which is about calling them contractors when actually they're workers, and it's really just a way, according to the lawsuits, of underpaying them, not paying them benefits, and so on. With the, it's still not resolved, even though they passed a law to make it legal to have Uber and Lyft drivers in California classified as contractors. It's still, there's a lawsuit saying whether that's not constitutional. But in those cases, it's kind of a little bit easier to understand. Somebody can decide when they want to drive for Uber or Lyft, and they decide a lot of their own issues. With the shot girls, what they're saying is that they had a defined number of shifts, they had to turn up at certain hours, and so on and so forth. Very much like just a regular employee. Mm-hmm. So what this kind of what the Department of Labor, the local office of wages and hours here, it's a drum they've been beating for quite a while. They've had 28 investigations of these particular cases in the last 5 years, the 5 years to the end of last year. And they got back $1 million in underpaid wages, unpaid wages for overtime, mostly in the building trades. So they're particularly concerned about the construction industry, where they got $250,000 back for painters and drywall guys, people who'd been working mainly on a Superdome project. They got that case resolved last week. And a lot of the companies they say, okay, we'll pay the money. We don't agree with the law. That's how these things are settled often. Same with the lawsuits. But what the Labor Department says is that a lot of sort of vulnerable folks, immigrants, often in the building trades, young women, obviously in the quarter, who are doing exotic dancing or shot girl work or any of this type of stuff, that they're getting exploited in this way. So it's kind of like a broader issue that this lawsuit is just part of. Okay, so we're going to be waiting to see what the situation will ultimately, how it will resolve. It's just, this suit has just been filed, right, that you're referring to? Yeah, this suit, the painters was a Department of Labor case, which was $240,000 last week. But last year, an IHOP lawsuit for about 400 workers, which was IHOP franchises in Louisiana and Mississippi, they settled for $1.7 million. So it's clearly worth people who might feel they don't really have a choice pursuing the issue. All right, Tony, thanks a lot. Dave, over to you right now. And we heard this past week an instance of a witness saying that she and her husband, the person she was with, saw a woman being raped in the French Quarter, and nobody's doing anything about it.
Yeah, she was walking on Royal Street at Toulouse and said she saw a woman who appeared to be unconscious or passed out, and a man on top of her raping her. And she calls 911, and the Lens obtained the audio of that 911 call and shared it with us. And in it, you can hear her telling the 911 operator, somebody needs to respond immediately, someone needs to stop this, he is raping her right now. And she says, wait, I see an officer. And less than a block away, she spots a police officer, and the 911 operator says, it's taking me time to dispatch this call. If you could ask that officer to please help. And so at the request of the 911 operator, she does. And she walks up to the police officer and she tells him, on that next corner, there's a man raping a woman. And he apparently does absolutely nothing in response to her pleading with him to go stop this rape and apprehend the rapist. And you can even hear her later in the 911 call complaining to the dispatcher that he's still sitting there. He's not moved. And she actually gets back to the scene before anybody arrives. And so there was this question of, well, why did this police officer not do anything in response to this woman telling him that there's a violent crime underway, a sexual assault underway, just less than a block away from where he was? Well, at first, we didn't know anything about it. We didn't know what agency he was a police officer for. We didn't know who he was. We didn't know, all we had was this 911 call. Well, through investigation at the NOPD, and apparently the officer coming forward to his boss, who is the Algiers constable, Edwin Shorty. We now know it was a deputy constable who was in that car at that location on Royal Street, less than a block away from Toulouse, and he was being paid privately to provide security for a movie shoot. But the constable, the Algiers constable for the second court, told us that's unacceptable. He failed miserably, in the constable's words, in serving and protecting the public, and should have, regardless of why he was there or what agency he worked for.
And he was not with NOPD?
No, he's a constable's deputy on a private detail, but that to his boss didn't matter, he told us. I interviewed him, and he told me, no, he took an oath to serve and protect, and he did neither. He did not protect that woman. He did not serve the public, and he said he absolutely should have. Now, there's some confusion about what he may or may not have actually done. The constable said there was evidence that he may have picked up one of his radios in an effort to get somebody else to respond, but the constable believed he did it on the radio provided to him by the movie, and that he was communicating with the other people on the set, not with NOPD, which his other radio would have done. NOPD did respond. Officers arrived in less than 5 minutes, but the rapist had fled by that time. And so they did not apprehend the rapist. They did not stop the sexual assault. And in fact, at last report, he was still at large and unidentified.
And the constable is 30 years in law enforcement.
30-year veteran of law enforcement is what the constable told us about the deputy. And he did suspend him immediately without pay pending the investigation.
Okay, very disturbing situation. Thanks a lot, Dave. Errol, over to you. Rail between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. Is that going to happen?
You know, there was once a train, a passenger train, that ran between New Orleans and Baton Rouge called the Rebel. And it used to be a really popular train, especially among LSU students, and there are stories about LSU game days and having a special train. And you can imagine a train full of LSU football fans going to the game. But that kind of went by the side. You know, once I-10 was built, that changed a lot of transportation alternatives out there. But there's talk about bringing back a line. In fact, in April, a test train was run, and they invited the governor and some state officials going between downtown Baton Rouge and New Orleans. The plan is it would run twice a day, back and forth. It would start in a terminal would be in Baton Rouge, and then they'd go through the medical district, and they go through Gonzales and Laplace, coming to the New Orleans area, stop at the airport, and then wind up at Union Passenger Terminal. So what happened this week is that the Department of Transportation gave a $20 million grant. Now the grant is for infrastructure improvements, including like developing railroad stations, like places like Gonzales and Laplace don't even have that. And so in these places, a railroad station is a fairly small place, but a comfortable place to wait. And so for that and infrastructure improvement, so at least there's money on the table and people starting to do something. We're still a long way away.
Right.
The track exists. This is the old Kansas City Southern track, and so that runs. And so that's one big hurdle.
Right. Okay, good. Well, it's a step forward. I know it's something that people would really love to see come to fruition. So, all right, E, thanks a lot. And Dave, we're going to wrap up with you. The Orleans DA, Jason Williams, has put out a call. He really needs help from the community to help solve crimes.
Williams jumped back in with both feet after he was found not guilty by a federal jury of tax fraud charges. He immediately went back to criminal court in New Orleans, and he prosecuted a second-degree murder case himself. And in the process of doing that, he did secure a guilty verdict for a murderer. And in the news conference afterwards, where he was talking to the media, he said, in this case that happened in a very public setting where a man was gunned down and shot to death in front of many witnesses and members of the victim's family, they could only get one person to testify in court. One person to cooperate with prosecutors to tell them what had happened. And he said they were very fortunate to get that one so they could get a killer off the street and sent to Angola for the rest of his life. But he said, had that one not come forward, they wouldn't have been able to do that. And he said in many cases, that is a huge problem now. Not only getting witnesses and family members to come forward to cooperate with prosecutors in trying to send criminals to jail. But he said even victims, more and more, will not assist them in prosecuting those who attacked them. And it's not only domestic cases, it's cases across the board.
Is this fear? Is it fear?
Oh, a lot of it is fear. He acknowledged that this victim's family was so afraid that the killer would be let go that they didn't even come to the trial. They didn't even want to be in the courthouse, let alone testify against this killer. And he said that they've got to find a way to overcome that. And they've got to find a way that when a prosecutor or a officer of the court, of the district attorney's office, comes and tries to find people to assist them, that they need that help. And he really was begging and pleading with the public. He said, if you want to stop this surge in violent crime, if you want to stop this scourge of a crisis, he said, that we have in New Orleans now, of criminals taking over, it's going to take the community stepping up and helping them send these people to prison. But obviously there's fear out there. There's fear of retribution. There's fear that if they are unsuccessful in that prosecution and that person is not found guilty and sent to jail forever, that they will then retaliate. And so it's been an issue. You know, the old snitches get stitches mantra through the community has apparently gone even further now.
Dave, I don't know if you remember a few years ago, there was a man who was a barber in the Claiborne Avenue area and sort of a beloved neighborhood character. And he was killed. And the investigation says that they think it was because there was a trial going on and someone knew that he knew a lot of people and he would talk.
The fear is real. Okay, and we are out of time right now, so thanks a lot, Dave. E, we're sticking with you for other stories real quick.
Okay, well, the Saints preseason begins this week. They only play 3 preseason games now, which I think everybody likes. It used to be 6 of them. But this year there's 2 on the road and 1 in New Orleans.
All right, LeBron, over to you.
The city budgeters are coming up, and spent some time over at Criminal District Court with the judges who've invited the council in this week to come and at least take a look at what their needs are. There'll be an awful lot more of that kind of dog and pony, if you will, show of different agencies trying to bend the ear of the council to get what they need.
All right, Tony.
Well, gas prices nationally went down below 4 this past week, and people might start to get a little complacent about inflation, but it's still there. And next month, expect interest rates to go up by the Fed, and that'll mean higher mortgage rates and so on.
Just go to the grocery. You'll realize it's still there. Dave.
The North Shore authorities are trying an unprecedented move of charging fentanyl dealers with murder when people overdose and die. And they, in fact, have arrested a family member of a 15-year-old boy who gave him a pill that he later then overdosed and died from. And they're not only prosecuting that family member for murder, but also the dealer who gave her that pill. And the coroner on the North Shore says it's just out of control, this fentanyl, and they have to do something to stop it.
Very sad. Okay, thanks, guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us. See you next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villeray.
With a lifetime of passion for public television, we are pleased to help underwrite Informed Sources.
Please join us in supporting WYES-TV.